Still not showing up on Twitter yet.
I can see it, man. I just
Here we
reposted
go.
it.
Yeah, let me just repost. Sure, let me do the same and then we'll get going. Okay, folks, we got that sent out into the abyss. We've got some eyeballs starting to trickle in here. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third episode of the ryQuant broadcast. We have a very, very, very big show today. And boy, have I been waiting. Bit Strategy is going to know what I'm going to say. Well, have I been waiting to have this show? I feel like this show specifically, Bit Strategy and myself have had many, many hours spent together on one-on-one Google Meets, text messages, all this stuff, all the time for, the better part of a full year now. And, I believe Bit Strategy is the optimal person of all the people that I could have, exposure or access to. I would pick Bit Strategy over the field to be this first guest, because again, this conversation is a long time coming. And Bit Strategy, in my opinion, is the world's leading poet, philosopher, risk manager, and MSTR theorist. So with that, welcome to the broadcast, Mr. Bit Strategy.
Mr. ryQuant, thank you so much for those kind words. No one's ever described me as optimal before in that way. So, that was an absolute pleasure. It's nice to be back live because I haven't jumped on live on a space or anything like that this year. I think pretty much completely. But I did them a lot with you, Ryan, last year in the monumental run up that we as MSTR shareholders all experienced. And it was a very bonding experience. Everyone that was there knows that we all sort of came together, formed a unit, and the whole thing sort of exploded in that crazy blow off top. Loads of new people came into the space, and it was all just a bit much for me after doing all those spaces. So I kind of went quiet. I went dark, and I've been working a lot on my terminal accumulation theory that you've seen me posting about, some of my deep analysis on MSTR. And it's, as it was last year, it's always been an honor to talk to you, Ryan, about these things, because it was Quant Bros. So if anyone doesn't know, Quant Bros was a famous YouTube series started by Ryan and Jeff Walton that sort of outlined the MSTR thesis and where it was going long term. And Ryan in particular introduced to me the concept of reflexivity, which you've probably heard Saylor mention. You hear it spoken about a lot, but it was Ryan that sort of introduced that term to me. And it was also Jeff's work sort of describing how there's no consistent valuation amongst the top companies, and how we might see a feedback loop between Bitcoin price appreciation and our domination of passive flows. So to get the opportunity 1 year on with Strategy as over $100 billion company now, and to sort of discuss these things again with you now that time's passed and some of these ideas that were presented in Quant Bros have been validated, it's incredibly exciting. And I just wanted to say to everyone, anyone that follows me, thanks so much for your support over the past year. There's been too many nice messages that have come in that have really meant the world, so I really appreciate that. And also, it's just a pleasure to work with so many smart people in the space. So the analysis that's getting put out left and right is fantastic. Some of the discussion, and even some of the emotion, like both ways, how strongly people feel about their different strategies. You know, you got people into selling covered calls, you got people leveraging up to the hill, you got other people like me that just want to build on top of strategy long term, almost like a startup. And it's that diversity of different strategies that really makes strategy the company it is. So yeah, I just wanted to say that more broadly to anyone listening. It's great to be in this community with you all. And if you don't know who I am or you've never seen my work before, please check out my website. It's bitstrategy.com. If you have seen my website before, if you've been there in the past, please take another look now. So again, it's bitstrategy.com. It's an ultra premium domain. And I've got a new page on there for products. So I've done a little page linking in as always with LaDoja's artwork, and embedded some of the videos of the recent product presentations. So I think it looks pretty swish. So please check it out. And yeah, thanks Ryan for the lovely introduction. Over to you.
Yeah, man. Again, thanks for coming on. Like I said, this conversation's been a long time coming, and also thank you for touching on how kind the influx of messages has been. You know, this is something that I find myself coming back to usually at like the end of the episode when I'm starting to get like, you know, all chucked up with emotion. But it really is heartwarming to see that, you know, there's this really what I would consider like elite group of people kind of like, you know, collaboratively deciding to work together. And the whole thing is like beautiful. It's almost like Milton Friedman's, you know, idea of capitalism, of all these people of different like backgrounds, walks of life. They live in different geographical areas, but they have a common vested interest that pulls them in together. And I think that is a beautiful thing, to your point. And one of the things that I think oftentimes gets missed in a lot of these conversations, right? Like I've been on a ton of podcasts, ton of spaces, ton of like those types of things over the past, I don't know, 18 months or something like that. All too often we skip past the personal side of things and the backgrounds of things and the experience and expertise that people have, because we're all so quick to like just jump into the like meat and potatoes and substance. But then, you know, one of the things we've seen over the past year and a half, 2 years is that there is this huge like credentialism class for like whatever reason. But even so, with that being said, there are some people who have done extremely like nuanced and like specific work within banks, within TradFi, within Wall Street. And they do have very, you know, interesting lessons and tidbits and also insights to provide to the broader community as to why they think a certain way they do, or why they take a certain, you know, cognitive approach that perhaps others do not. So Bit Strategy, I'd love to pass it to you for whatever you want to say, kind of on that personal experience piece and sort of like who made you the person you are, even before your you know, Twitter X career, being a huge MSTR like shareholder. Like what kind of got you to that point, and how are you using those things on a go forward basis from here?
Yeah, cool. Good question, and agree with you completely. And before I sort of go into the personal side, because it links in, just to touch on what you're saying about this collaborative community that we've got going, and it reminded me of a conversation that we had previously about what companies used to be, or what companies were back in the day. And companies used to be the coming together of people in communities to pool their money. You know, and often they might meet together in public spaces and discuss, and they might not know each other beforehand, but there was certainly that social element. And then over time, that seems to have got lost a bit, and being a shareholder has become, you know, more passive with the rise of passive investing, and it's much less likely that retail shareholders would ever meet each other. But what we're seeing in the era of cyberspace is that we're coming full circle, and now because of the communication technology that we have and the mobile wave that has occurred, we can now collaborate just like we did back in the origins of companies. And I think that's really special. One of the reasons it's so nice for me to work with Americans on a day-to-day basis is that I have a very fond memory of living in America as an infant. So when I was about 1 year old, I think 1.5, my dad got a job in America, and he moved our family to Grand Rapids in Michigan. And so I was there for about 1.5 years. And even though I was so young, it was really formative because compared to England, Americans are very sort of open, friendly, um, and positive, I would say. So no disrespect to British culture, but I think most Brits would agree that Americans have us outclassed in those areas. And so I think being exposed to that sort of positivity, sort of blue sky thinking, world is your oyster, that was really key for me at that young age. And even without that, I think everyone feels a strong connection to America because the world has become so Americanized. So to actually be able to interact and build and work with Americans in particular has been great. So as I mentioned, I'm British, but I moved to Australia when I was 18, to Sydney, Australia, on a backpacking trip. It was meant to be just a 1 year backpacking trip before I came back to the UK to study law. But when I got to Australia, it was absolutely amazing. So just beautiful beaches, like very much an outdoor lifestyle in Sydney, and it just blew my mind. And it was unlike anything I'd seen back home. I've been on holiday to Europe and whatnot, but it was just an amazing place. And there was lots of work opportunities as well. So this was back in sort of 2006. So I got a job for one of the big banks over here called Westpac. And I started selling life insurance for the bank. So that was my first sort of foray into financial services. So it was in like I say, an operational role selling life insurance. But on the side, the bank put me through a financial planning qualification. So even when I was very young, so as I say, just 18, I got introduced to sort of portfolio theory, things like that, personal financial planning, risk management, tax planning, so on. And I did that alongside selling insurance. Then, because of the time I was there, it was pre-GFC, so the market was very frothy, and it was a good environment for selling insurance and lots of opportunity to get promoted and things like that. So I was loving life, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to stay in Australia, not go back home, not go study law, and who needs uni? I'm the king of the world, earning all my commission, selling my insurance. This is great. But then the GFC happened, and the company that I was subcontracting to the bank with, they went under. So it was like $100 million company that the bank used as a subcontractor. And when that company went under, I lost my visa. So at this point, I've been in Australia like 3 years. But because of this big corporate collapse, because of the GFC, now it looked like I was going to have to go home. But luckily, I had very nice parents, and they helped me go to uni in Australia. So that allowed me to stay. And I did, I studied applied finance and accounting, carried on sort of selling insurance part-time while I was doing that, which was pretty tough being an international student in Australia, trying to sort of keep your head above water, getting through uni, still trying to sell some insurance part-time to fund yourself, but I did it. Finish uni, and then that helped me qualify for permanent residency in Australia. So at that point, I could stay, and I got a job as a financial services auditor at Deloitte. So you can start to see how things are starting to tie together, right? So very early on, I got introduced to financial planning. So I was thinking about things from that lens, about investment performance and whatnot. And even at that time, I saw that, okay, the numbers kind of don't work. So if you take the average person and how much they need to have a reasonable lifestyle in retirement, I could tell that the returns that people were expecting on their stock portfolio and whatnot were not going to be enough in general to fund a decent retirement. So even that early on, even like pre-GFC, when I was still a teenager, I was always thinking, oh my goodness, I need to get better performance somehow. I need to like earn more money somehow. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to support myself. So, like I say, early on, I had that almost financial anxiety about how am I going to get the returns I need. And we've obviously got that other backdrop as well for any Bitcoiners listening. That, of course, as we know, this at the same time the GFC was happening, Bitcoin was being born, and even written into the Genesis block, I think it is that message that the chancellor is on the brink of bailout for banks, or second bailout, something like that. And so you got exposed. I was being exposed to these ideas of like, quantitative easing and things like that at the same time that I was losing my job. And so I remember just being pissed off. I remember being pissed off at the system, like that it wasn't working. Pissed off that I lost my job. Like I was pissed off I had to go to uni. I thought I'd never have to go to uni. I thought I was just gonna, be earning the big bucks in the city forever. But it's a bit of a come down, to be honest. When I was 21, now I've lost my job, GFC, the economy's through the gutter, and now I don't have much money. I've got to study accounting just to stay in the country. Like it was all awful. Anyway, so finish my degree, get my job at Deloitte. So I was, like as I said, a financial services auditor, and one of my major clients was BlackRock, and they also used JP Morgan as the administrator. So absolute sort of dream experience out of uni, coming in. I mean, I didn't know I wanted to be an investor at that point, but in hindsight, it was great experience if you did want to be an investor, being a financial services auditor. So getting to go inside BlackRock, and they had 100 different funds in Australia, and I was auditing the compliance plans of those funds. So how do these funds stay compliant with all the regulations that they've got to adhere to, and sort of getting an understanding of risk and controls within these organizations. How do these companies put in place their controls? What sort of risks are they protecting against? And how does an external auditor validate those controls?
Right.
So that was sort of the focus of the work. But then naturally you just got exposed to, by proximity, to fund management in general, and you got to see sort of the scale of BlackRock, and you got to see how, via its funds, like BlackRock owns these enormous percentages in all these different companies. And a lot of people aren't aware of that, how these big passive fund managers, how they own such large percentages of almost every major company. But early in my career, I was, directly exposed to that. So that was very eye-opening. And while working there, I, started my chartered accounting course to, qualify as the equivalent of a CPA in Australia. We call it a chartered accountant. So I was doing that course, but sort of a couple of years into auditing, I was like, oh, you know what? I don't want to stay working for the, the big four. I want to get back inside the banks because, as I said, that's where I started my career. And I felt like, you can make more money in the banks, or at least that's what I thought. Seemed like there was more opportunity and whatnot. So I did a very naughty thing, because you're meant to stay for at least 3 years when you join a big four out of uni. But only like 2 years in, I was like, okay, sod this. I'm going to try and get a job. And I got a job at the biggest bank in Australia called Commonwealth Bank, which right now is worth about 200 billion US. So it's a big, big company, to give you an idea. I think back then it was probably, I don't know, about 100 billion, something like that. This is sort of 2015, we're talking, when I started work there. And I got a job in operational risk and remediation. And it was in their sort of wealth management arm as well. And that job was great. So that would I love that. Everyone thought, oh, why do you want to work in remediation? But I really liked it. So,
Hmm.
you know, you'd get these, we'd call them issues or incidents, right? So different things that would crop up, and problems in the bank that mean customers have been impacted. So there'll be an undetermined number of customers that have been impacted by some kind of unknown issue. So you really don't know anything when you come into a problem, and your job is to work out what went wrong, how many people were affected, and how much money do we need to pay them back, and when are we going to be able to do that by. And some of these projects were small. Some projects I did later in my career, they were 8-figure remediations. So, you know, really large sums of money, and sometimes thousands of customers impacted. So really large scale projects. And I, you know, started off as an analyst on those projects, but then I became a senior business analyst, and I was leading projects. And in doing so, I got this really broad experience across different businesses within the bank, and with all sorts of different systems and products, because no two remediations were the same. So it was always a different issue in a different business with a different product, different brands. So I got to see really firsthand how a bank operates on the inside, and how all the different sections of the bank link together, and why things go wrong in the bank. So normally there's either a system issue, so somehow the system hasn't been coded correctly with the rules and regulations, and that's caused some kind of impact, or there's some kind of operational failure. So a team hasn't performed their procedures correctly, and that's caused some kind of problem. And sometimes, you know, a combination of the two, with all sorts of different nuance and knock-on effects. So it really trains you well to think in terms of first order, second order, third order effects. You know, understanding why things went wrong, doing forensic accounting to work out the value of the errors in the current day. So you had to work out, like, sometimes an error might have occurred 15 years ago, and now you've got to work out what's the present value of that error today, once you've compensated the customer for the time value lost. You know, so and various ways we had to calculate that rate of return. So lots of really in-depth work about risk controls, investment performance, and so on. And my work, I would have to have it approved by the bank's actuaries. So if anyone's worked with actuaries before, I'm sure Jeff has, because he was works in insurance, right? The actuaries are incredibly particular, and because they have to be for their role, because they're, you know, pricing risk and whatnot. And so I got used to developing documents for formal approval within the bank. So there's a way you have to do that. There's a way you have to document the risks, the assumptions, dependencies, and so on. And so that, even though I wasn't, you know, a portfolio manager, it gave me a good understanding of how banks are operationalized,
Right.
which was great. But alongside me doing, and I know I'm really waffling on, but alongside that, I was still trying to make money, or I still thought, oh God, even with my bank career, I'm not going to make enough money here. So I was always trying to do startups on the side. Like, I was obsessed with sort of startup theory, really big fan of Tim Ferriss and Peter Thiel, and understanding the theory of startups and, you know, startup strategy. So before I first heard about Bitcoin in 2015, but because I was so obsessed with startups, I sort of put that to one side, because I had the idea that, no, I'm gonna be that $1 billion founder. That's what I'm gonna do. And I won't go into a couple of my failed projects that I was doing, but to say the least, they failed. And so it gets to around 2017, and I've sort of lost all of my capital in these failed startups. And I've known about Bitcoin for 2 years, but I hadn't done anything with it. And so in 2017, I take a closer look and I started going down the rabbit hole. And, you know, as I'm sure has happened to many other people, sort of one thing led to another. And very quickly, I just became obsessed with Bitcoin. And so I took like my retirement funds. I created like a self-managed fund. I went all in Bitcoin 2017. Went sort of deep into trading, becoming a Bitcoin trader. So I traded a lot of altcoins as well, but always with the goal of increasing my total Bitcoin holdings. So right from the start, I wasn't like, you know, maxi in the sense that I felt cryptocurrencies were evil, but I was always a maxi in the sense that my goal was to denominate my wealth in Bitcoin and increase my total Bitcoin holdings. So I was always looking at it like that. Carried on working, carried on trading, and then in 2020, I did a few good trades in a row. So I managed to short the COVID crash. And then, so it was quite a cool story. I was like skiing in Switzerland, and you know, it came on the news that they're shutting down Italy and this and that. And I thought to myself, this is, you know, the markets are going to tank. And I think we had about a week. I think Bitcoin was about sort of 12K, 10 to 12K. I was looking at it, I was thinking they're shutting down airports. This is definitely going to tank. And so took a big short, closed around 3K as well. And then I longed loads of DeFi from the bottom in like 2020. So like Aave, Doge, a lot of Ethereum, those sort of things. So I did really well in that COVID crash. And that was what allowed me to quit my job and sort of have enough capital to focus on proprietary trading and investment full time. So that was a really big deal for me. But right when that happened, my family back in the UK, like my mum had a fall, and so I had to go back to the UK to sort of help out family. So it was quite, in a sense, it was quite serendipitous that I'd got to that point in my career where I could quit my job just before that happened. And so family was really my focus for the next couple of years. I was still obviously looking at the markets on the side and thinking about the markets all the time, but I wasn't massively actively trading compared to how I had been. And also I made some bad trades as well. Like, you know, it was a difficult market, you know, around that sort of 2022 time. Made some bad trades. Wasn't too happy with myself that I'd seen a big drawdown on my account. I felt like I'd been a bit sloppy, you know what I mean, a bit greedy. And I've been following Saylor closely since 2020, MicroStrategy story since 2020. But to be honest, I'd been worried that Saylor was going to get liquidated in the bear market. I'd sort of fallen victim to that FUD, and I wasn't confident. One, I was also I had too much hubris, you know what I mean? So at the time, so 2020 to 2022, I felt like I was the king of the world. I thought I was a genius superstar trader. Like, you know, I thought Saylor, he's just this guy that's coming in, you know, in 2020, he's not a Bitcoin OG. Like, he doesn't really know about Bitcoin that much. So I had that sort of arrogance, that deep arrogance in me at that time. Because it also, remember, it's when I sort of first made my money. So yeah, it got to my head a bit. But then after that drawdown where my account got destroyed, I was like, okay, you're not actually as good as you think you are, BitStrategy. You need to rethink what you're doing. And I knew I didn't want to get a normal job again, because I couldn't go back to going into like a bank or something like that. Or, you know, I'm a bit loose. So as soon as I had a bit of money, it was hard to like hold my tongue and not say what I think, which you have to do inside big companies sometimes, right? And so I was like, oh, you know, I really don't want to get a job, but I kind of missed the direction I had from my job. You know, I missed working in a big company. I missed the prestige you felt when you worked in a big company.
Yeah.
I missed the idea, like before I left my job, I had the idea that I was just going to, you know, grow and become, you know, top executive. So I missed that sort of that direction I had. And then in sort of 2023, you know, I took a big position in strategy. It did quite well. You know, it ran up a lot. And then I thought, you know what, I'm gonna double down on this, and I'm gonna sort of try and combine my career, my banking career, combine my love for startups, and combine my love for Bitcoin, and try and put it all into one package that sort of represents who I am, what I can do, what I want to do, and also is a way of giving thanks to what Saylor had done for Bitcoin. So I feel like I still feel like this. I feel like without Saylor, who knows what the price would be today? Like, who knows where we would be at? It needed that kind of leadership that he's come in and given. And I still do, I felt a ton of gratitude for that. And I also saw an opportunity. You know, so maybe we can touch back on this later, but long story short, that's why I founded bitstrategy.com and doubled down on my investment, decided to start becoming an activist investor with a very clear mission to help grow strategy into a $10 trillion company. And that was about a year ago now, and really haven't looked back. My life's just improved as a result. It feels like it's given me enormous direction and sort of satisfaction. So I really enjoy writing and sharing my analysis online, and building with the other strategy shareholders, and building alongside Saylor in this sort of synergistic and decentralized way that we're all doing. It's the most fun I've ever had professionally my entire life.
Wow.
And so, yeah, and you're a big part of that, mate. And like people like you and everything like that, and all the great people online. And yeah, this is really, it's what I want to do for the rest of my life. Like, I'm absolutely sure about that. And I'm absolutely sure we're going to succeed on this mission we all have to grow strategy into the biggest company. I feel that in my heart, like a burning fire, Ryan. And I know we're going to achieve it. So yeah, what more could you want? So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded and gave you a bit of a, you know, a feel for who I am. And I was hoping, mate, that you could sort of do the same and sort of talk us through a bit of your personal story. You've shared a bit with me in the past, but I'd love to hear more, and how you're thinking about that today, and in the current context of where we're at.
Yeah, and I love us taking our time on this topic. You know what I mean? Like, especially since I hope you are a friend of the show, and I've told you offline, like, you can come on any Monday that you want. Hopefully, the more the merrier. And so it's good to do this now at the foundation of this. I've got like 7 quick topics to just like quick fun little. I'll fly through them. Quick little fun comments about everything that you had said, and then I'll get to your question about me, but. I actually right now have a young lady at the door who's very skittish, because the other day, you know, we had Adrian Pruitt in here. He was filming for the earnings call. So she thinks there's like another person in here because we have this sophisticated, you know, British speaking voice. So let me just bring her in, get her on camera for a second so that she'll calm down, because she's just crying outside my door here.
Oh,
Sophie. Sophie, come here. Up. So this is I hope we can see her. I think we can a little bit. This is my friend's dog. You know, I get to spend a ton of time with her. I think almost of her as like, you know, my niece or something like that. Like, I'm the uncle here, and she's just been an awesome like militaristic dog to, and I hope she stays here as long as she wants. She's been an awesome militaristic dog to, like, you know, work with, and start to give me a good prep of what it's going to be like, you know, having my own like extremely high energy working dog. So, and sometimes just going on a run with Sophie is really like just the best thing you need to get away from the computer and just like really, do some hard work and clear your mind. So that's the fun Sophie introduction. And I hope she decides to hang out here as long as she can. She loves that I have the fan that can just blow directly on her. But okay, couple quick, because I loved everything you said, and we could talk for hours about just these comments. But living through the 2008 global financial crisis, I think is so fascinating, right? Because I was like a sophomore or junior in high school. So I lived through it, but obviously, not as an investor, as a kid playing like Halo 3 all night in the summer. I had no idea what was going on. The naughty option of leaving after 2 years in Deloitte. I did something similar with my corporate gig. The depth of cross-functional like banking experience that you have is just, I think, really fascinating, because it's, you're one of these folks who can like really see the whole picture. I think the startup theory here is absolutely fascinating, both from like all the Teal stuff, all the Naval stuff, all that kind of stuff, and as it pertains to what you're doing with bid strategy and having that like entrepreneurial mindset, even though like we're shareholders on the outside looking in. And I think all too often shareholders get like minimized for the seriousness of the position that it is. Another thing, you getting into Bitcoin after first hearing about it in 2015, saying I first heard about it in 2015, didn't take any action until 2018. So a year after you actually got involved. And then last but not least, actually last and most is, bid strategy. I've always thought one of the most honorable things about you is how willingly you made that decision to go, be the primary caretaker for family, especially with, being this hotshot guy at the bank, finance, on top of the world, young man. It's really a humble, and it's just the honorable right thing to do in that situation. So I'll always give you the ultimate tip of the cap as far as that's concerned. But yeah, so so going into my background a little bit, Rutgers, master's in data science. That's where I really like locked in on the magic of, extracting actionable insights from large data sets. I really do think that is magic. Did a short stint in the corporate space, ultimately exiting that job in June of 2023, and then just, full-time investing, because that was really what I thought like my passion and calling was using the data science skill set in a way that's accretive for me in order to, achieve the financial goals I was looking for. But the interesting thing though, perhaps, is is like the military background. And I feel like I'm so far disconnected from the Army that like sometimes I forget I was even in. So the last thing I'm doing here is like, oh, like, I'm cool. Look at me. I was in the Army. The reason I bring this up is to hopefully give folks a little bit of context into like my kind of like operating system or things of that nature, in the sense that like, what I did in the Army, including the deployment to Afghanistan in 2013, was I was a combat engineer. You can think of that as like a hybrid between an infantry soldier and an EOD, like bomb technician disposal soldier. We drove around the robot, the Talon robot that you see in the movies that has like the little arm like this. We put the C4 into the grippers. We drive the little robot out to wherever the bombs are. Then we're never we're never cut the red wire or cut the blue wire like in the movies. That's all fake. We just use our own explosives to blow up the existing explosives that are there. And the way you find these bombs is by driving on the road between 3 to 5 miles an hour. I mean, you're riding the brake the whole time to the point. And after doing this for 12 to 14 hours in a day, your legs, like your calf, your quads, your hamstrings are just so locked up from riding the brake the whole day. And you have to go out and find the bombs. And the bombs are mostly in the culverts, which is the underwater passageway. So we could use the big arm that would like swing out from the Buffalo or the RG-31 and then kind of stick that that camera in through the culvert. So, and again, I can go on and on about the detail and the nuance of this stuff, but the obvious operating like method for work that is that serious at the highest of stakes, including life and death. Because if 300 pounds of homemade explosive goes off underneath your truck, it's probably the it for the existence of the people living in there. So there is no fucking around, is the point that I'm trying to get at. And I wish that finance, investing, I wish that had like the same level of seriousness with details and the consequences. Of course, we shouldn't think of this as a life and death thing, but when we think about like the time value of like people's money in the extreme positive sense of, this can be like the asymmetry that gets people like out of the matrix for whatever that means for them, but also like not losing the money, right? So on like the negative loss side of things. And so that's just wanted to give you a little bit of wanted to give the group a little bit of context there, as far as like whether it's like me going after Jack Maulers, which this is not the time and place to get into that, or if it's me, like the Fred Krueger stuff of last year. I'm used to the like alpha male, in your face, objectivity, binary. It's white or black. It's right or wrong. It's value add or it's value take away. And I think we should kind of somewhat be living up to that level of intensity. So, like I've said to Bit Strategy before, you can take the soldier out of the valley, but it's impossible to take the valley out of the soldier. And that's kind of what I'm doing here, right? It's not like I'm thinking like, oh, I'm going to go after this person or that person. I just read everything, listen to everything, the CNBC clips, the Bloomberg clips. It's where you see Jack wearing a t-shirt. I just listen into all these things and respond. Almost like in Margin Call, where John Told is like, look, there's nothing we can do to stop this. We can't even ever so slightly alter it, but we're just here. We just respond. We just react to the information around us. So that's enough rambling on that. Bit Strategy, you got any more comments on this kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Or should we, what you got?
Man, I've got so many comments, mate. So yeah, so firstly, just back on what you said about shareholders and people not really taking it that seriously or not giving it the respect. Yeah, I think that's spot on, and I think it's crazy, because what does a shareholder mean? It means that you're a co-owner of a company. And so it's like people will talk to you like, oh, who are you having an opinion on this company? You're just a shareholder. Or like, why are you wanting the company to do well? It's like, well, because I have a financial interest in the company. That is what a shareholder is. And it's funny that we've lost that along the way. And I think it's a good thing for business in general to have engaged and interested shareholders.
Yeah.
I think it keeps businesses in check, and I think it can also help businesses grow a lot faster. And Strategy's a great example of that, how it's been able to integrate its engaged retail shareholder base, and how it continues to adapt to the conversation that goes on, and how it's integrated it into its own business. I think it's going to be studied about for many decades to come. So to be part of that's fantastic. Just on on your experience, I think whenever a bureaucracy forms, or so take it a step back, whenever there's power, there's a temptation for a bureaucracy to form around it, and then it's in the interest of the bureaucracy to gatekeep the source of the power and to create sort of invisible barriers that keep outsiders away from the power. The problem with that is that it's terribly inefficient for getting things done. So once you put these bureaucracies in place, it's very hard to unwind them. You see this at the state level with the federal spending and trying to reduce that. Like, why is there all that federal spending? It's because there's this enormous source of power, the federal government, and then all sorts of groups and people try to capture that and protect it, and for their own benefit. And then over time, the source of power becomes less efficient because there's all this friction. There's all these leeches sort of taking bits of it and stopping genuine challenge, stopping innovation, protecting the people that are entrenched in positions of power. You get sort of a bit of a revolving door, where people like the regulators and the government or the big companies, they all sort of become kind of one thing, regulatory capture. And so where am I going with that? Well, when you're doing something that's very real, like explosives, there's no room for bullshit because people get blown up. And so you can't get away with this type of obfuscation, this sort of double speak, all of those sorts of things, obfuscation, double speak, passive aggression, they work really well in bureaucracies, really well. Being a Karen works really well in bureaucracies. Complaining works really well in bureaucracies.
Right.
Once things get serious, there's no time for any of that because you've just got to get the thing done. As you said, it's a binary. It's an A or a B.
Right.
And if people are used to operating in bureaucracies or being in corporations where there's double speak, it's going to be very jarring to have someone come in that talks bluntly and doesn't respect the existing political hierarchy.
Yep.
So for example, one of the things that's awkward is that Jack Mallers operates in a higher position in the Bitcoin bureaucratic hierarchy than you do or I do, right? Much higher. And as such, there's an unspoken rule that you shouldn't necessarily challenge him in that way. But you're not doing so from a position of disrespect. You're just trying to keep it real. And it will feel somewhat jarring if people aren't used to that. I know both of us are Joe Rogan fans, and it's a big reason why Rogan has been so successful. Like, I've been a Rogan fan since 2010, and so it's been crazy to watch his rise from someone that was advertising fleshlights when he started to,
Right.
so he actually, that was a sponsor of the show, was the fleshlight, right the way through to deciding a presidential election pretty much. And he's always spoken about what he was doing from the start, which was never adjusting what he wanted to say because a boardroom of executives are telling him he can't say that. Right. That it was always that from the start. And his approach was, look, I've got to say what I want to say or what I'm thinking, because otherwise I'm not going to want to do it.
Right.
And there's no value. So as soon as, if you were to ever stop being yourself or stop saying things as you thought them, you might as well just not bother doing this.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I know you're not a confrontational person whatsoever. But sometimes confrontation is necessary. For me, like when, I'm also in my job, it's not the same as the military, but in my job, I also couldn't pussyfoot around things because then I couldn't remediate the remediation, right? So in my job, I had to work out what had gone wrong and whose fault it was. And so naturally that makes you not very popular, because someone's made a mistake generally. So you get used to sort of separating the political fallout from what you are going to say with the realities of your analysis, because they're two different things. And from my experience, analysis and politics never go hand in hand.
Right.
Never. They never go hand in hand. Like, to give you a great example, like the British government, they commissioned this study into the harmful effects of drugs, and they got this, I think his name was Professor David Nutt, I think. and he did this study, and the results came back that alcohol was actually the most harmful drug for both the user and for society at large, right? That was the results of his scientific study. The government just disregarded it. Why? Because it wasn't politically palatable,
Right.
right? So analysis and what's politically palatable, whatever the Overton window is, whether that's the Overton window within our community on social media talking about Bitcoin and treasury companies, there is an Overton window. There's a, for anyone that doesn't know, that's the element of discourse that is okay to talk about, where you're not seen as a radical. But often good analysis will not fall inside the Overton window, right? And many themes of my work, and I think your work, sometimes fall outside of the Overton window of what's, okay to discuss. So a good example being Quant Bros having the idea that strategy may be some kind of monopoly is not within the Bitcoin Overton window. Let's just say, right? It challenges some of the politically accepted axioms of Bitcoin culture. Same with a lot of my work, or ideas like terminal accumulation theory, ideas that fiat is not going to go away, things like that. Those are the outcomes of my analysis. I'm not looking to upset people or make people feel uncomfortable. I'm just trying to share my analysis, what's the process I followed in my logic to arrive at those conclusions, and then to discuss and debate them, and maybe learn why they're wrong, or how I need to develop my thinking. And I think you've always had that approach to collaborative analysis as well. You're not claiming to be right. You're claiming that you want to have an open conversation and learn and figure things out. And I'm okay with not knowing everything. But that's fine. But we can never be scared to challenge questions, or challenge axioms in the space. Like look at Saylor, right? Most of what Saylor says is outside the Bitcoin Overton window. So, for example, Saylor doesn't have a problem saying crypto.
Yeah.
But within the Bitcoin space, there's a lot of people that won't even speak to you if you say the word crypto, right? So, not your keys, not your coins, right? That was another, just a given of the Bitcoin space. It's another thing that is challenged by Saylor. And so you've got to sort of ask yourself, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to say the thing that's going to fall within that window of what everyone deems is okay, or are you going to try and take a step back, look at it with first principles, and think, well, what does the logic tell you? And so, one of the reasons I follow Saylor is he does that fearlessly, right? He doesn't care what's been said about Bitcoin in the past. He's looking at it with a fresh pair of eyes, and he sees it a certain way. And
and sorry to cut you off, but that legendary
please.
tweet from 2013, he himself said bad things about it. To your point about the willingness to stay open-minded.
Yeah, exactly. And and I think most people have that kind of story. 2015, I heard, 14, sorry, Andreas Antonopoulos comes on Joe Rogan.
True.
I thought he was great. I thought he was amazing, but I thought I was going to be a rich startup founder. So, like, what do I need Bitcoin for? Which is, to Saylor's point, like, if you don't need Bitcoin, or you don't feel like you need Bitcoin, you might not do anything with it. And I think that's key as well. Like, one of the things I love about Saylor is that he sort of naturally understands product design, right? And he understands that you don't force your product on everyone else. You design products to suit the needs of the people, right? That's the fundamental difference, I would say, between strategy and trad bit philosophy. Is that the trad bit philosophy is the idea that everyone is dumb if they don't understand Bitcoin,
Right,
right?
right.
And unless people adopt Bitcoin like I've adopted Bitcoin, then they're idiots, right? And that's, it's just it's never going to catch on in that way, right? Yeah, sorry, mate, over to you.
Do one quick thing, and then I want to pass it back to you. This goes back to the Jeff Booth thing, and I know Josh Mandel is quite big on this too, in the sense that like we have to drop this whole like elitism narrative of like I never once said this or like alluded to it, but like to your point, you see this out there where it's like, oh, you're an idiot if you haven't like figured out the global world order and the power structures of the world and the downsides of the Fed and the downsides of TARP, the American Rescue Plan in 2008, and the downside of QE and ZERP, quantitative easing and zero interest rate policy. Like we really have to drop this whole elitism, this whole arrogance around like, oh, we've figured out the major thing, because like the reality is that like most people, most normal everyday working class people, they don't even know what the stock market is. And I always find myself coming back to that to just show that like something that we take for granted, right? The top 500 American companies, they all generate earnings. We assign like, price to earnings multiple on them. Some get a higher one, like the higher grower ones get a higher, PE multiple, the lower growers get a lower one. Like we take all these things, as if it's like common knowledge, but it's not. And this stuff is actually like quite intimidating. Like if someone was to go to my page and see like volatility, convexity, asymmetry, options theory, all this stuff, they're going to be, it's for like a micro, like niche audience. It's not for like, a broad audience. So again, I do want to pass this back because you were on a roll, but it's like, we have to drop this whole, and this is a very Jeff Booth thought, that we have to drop this whole elitism, have honest conversations, have empathy, have compassion for like our fellow man and woman, or else there is never going to be like, productivity or like a change in philosophy,
100%, mate. Yeah, 100%. And it's also to do with, technical limitations and the realities of how successful, I guess, we've been as Bitcoiners, spreading adoption, how technically possible was adoption even. So if for example, if we think about, okay, well, we need everyone to have access to Bitcoin. Well, what's the plan for the mentally handicapped or the people with IQ lower than 75, which is obviously very, very awkward to talk about, or sometimes that's seen as controversial to talk about. But if the goal is mass Bitcoin adoption, then we have to think about, how will elderly people manage, their keys and whatnot and things like that. They're not practical, and there's also just not enough space on the blockchain to handle transactions at that scale. So there's always had to be some kind of layer 2 scaling. So then the only real question is, how does the layer 2 scaling need to look? Now, historically, obviously I guess the idea, so to speak, in the Bitcoin space is that scaling will occur via things like Lightning Network, and that's how transactions scale. But what we've seen in practice is that it's the store of value function that scales, not the medium of exchange function, because there's much more. The addressable market for the store of value function is in the hundreds of trillions, whereas the addressable market for medium of exchange is relatively niche. It's not that it's a small market, and you can, Jack being a great example, you can obviously build a great business on focusing on medium of exchange. But the much bigger idea is the layer 2 as a store of value. And, I say this a lot, that, only 4% of the global population has layer 1 Bitcoin. Strategy is how we get it to the other 96%. So strategy is the scaling mechanism for Bitcoin. And, it's that something can be better, right? And still not a mass market product. So for example, Linux is most computer techie nerds will tell you that Linux is the best operating system. And you know what? They're probably right. They're probably right, aren't they? That it is the best. Just like layer one Bitcoin is the best. If you're that sort of person, like we are, maybe like this sort of technocratic type of person. But for the average person, Linux is not the best operating system. It's Windows, right? And you know, if people just carry on going, oh, everyone's dumb if they don't use Linux. Well, you can be right, but you wouldn't be Bill Gates then, would you? Because the opportunity was to build the product that everyone can and will use, not the best product. Because what does best mean? Best is subjective, right? So best according to the technocrats. Okay, like that's great. And I'll just finish by linking this back to an idea of, I think, how, Saylor comes at Bitcoin a little bit, because which I think is sometimes missed in the discourse somewhat, or the implications. And I think this is something that you've been banging the drum on for ages and done a really good job with, which is that Saylor was a tech investor before he was a Bitcoiner.
Yeah.
Right? So one, he was a tech entrepreneur, so he knows that side of it. He knows how to do the whole startup thing. So he thinks like a founder, because he is one. But then he made a lot of his money as an investor, not even as an entrepreneur, by taking, some of the money he had from his business and then buying Apple and Facebook. I think it might have been other ones, but they're the ones I always remember. And he's talked at length about the lessons he learned from that, how he realized, trading's kind of silly. You pick the best asset, buy it, don't worry too much about price, keep buying it. One of the reasons he's been so successful with Bitcoin is he took those lessons as a private tech investor and he applied them as a corporate treasury strategy with Bitcoin because he could, right? And often we think about, when Saylor's talking about Bitcoin, we think, oh, he's just talking about Bitcoin. Yeah, he is talking about Bitcoin, but he's talking about it in that way because he's coming at it from that tech investor mindset of, I'm going to buy this thing. I'm just going to keep buying it. It's the best thing. I'll keep buying it, right? And then, so I think he's always looked at it like that. And then the next layer of that is to think, well, how then does he look at strategy? Like, so if he's made a huge amount of money betting on Facebook and Apple, and he was right, and they turned into these big internet monopolies, how do you think he sees strategy? Well, to me, like, clearly what Saylor probably wants, more than anything, apart from maybe Bitcoin to succeed, he wants to be, one of the big boys. He wants to be one of the big boys. He wants to, call up his mate Jeff Bezos. I think they're friends, aren't they? I'm not sure. And go, hey Jeff, I'm ahead of you. So I think he's always looked at strategy as having that ability to be a tech giant. It's really clear now when he's saying, I'm going to be the Amazon of the capital markets, so we're going to be. But I think that's always been the goal from the outset, which to me is why it's interesting that there's such a aversion to thinking about strategy in that way. That it is the next, it is a Google story, or even bigger, because I think it's quite clear that's how Saylor sees it. Anyway, mate, sorry, over to you.
Yeah, no, this is such a great place to start to work towards this KPI discussion and like strategy specific. But just one thing there about the end of what you were saying, during the FTX blow up in that November, December 2022, the crux of the thesis for me was a much more simplified thesis for MicroStrategy at the time. And it was in the sense that, this is levered Bitcoin. This is, got the most recognizable, Bitcoin bull in the world at the helm, and really to hone in on that. And then the thesis obviously became much more developed as time went on. But the key thing with like the Sailor phenomenon was that like it was the mobile wave. Like I feel like so many of our conversations end up like leading back to the mobile wave, but it was his ability to operate as like a tech investor, almost like a tech hedge fund manager, which then tied into my broader thesis of like viewing MicroStrategy as this like financial engineering, like quasi like hedge fund type entity. So I think that kind of concept is starting to be realized, that this is, you know, a very seasoned like tech investor, you know what I mean? Both in terms of like the money he was able to make in owning the key domains such as like love.com, and his other business ventures, to then put that into what was known back then as like the FANG stocks: Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google. I don't think he dabbled in Netflix, but Netflix was very much in that same broader bucket. But yeah, I think this is a great point to kind of pivot towards some of the broader KPI discussion as it pertains to strategy and the rest of the Bitcoin treasury companies. And there's like about 4 or 5 like interconnected ideas here, and then I'll just like list them all off, set the stage, and then I'll let Bit Strategy take it in whatever direction, and I'm sure there'll be a back and forth there. So issues with Bitcoin yield, especially as it pertains to using Bitcoin yield as a way to compare like the other Bitcoin treasury companies without also factoring in size. Like if we think of my force equals mass times acceleration, you know, comparison, it would be something like Bitcoin force times mass would be, you know, Bitcoin dollar gain, and acceleration would be Bitcoin yield. I think you definitely need to have like both in them, to the extent that folks want to use these as a comparison KPI. Because when we think about like Bitcoin yield, and this also ties into the broader like discussion of strategy, even creating all these KPIs, it was like right around the time when, you know, Metaplanet and like Semler were coming out, you know, like 12, 14, 18 months ago. And what that means is like this was never like introduced as a way of like, this is how we can, you know, compare the companies. It was more so of an internal only thing to show that like we are actually generating a form of yield here and growing the Bitcoin per share. So there's that piece. I touched on the Bitcoin dollar gain. I think it'd be great to touch on like shadow Bitcoin, terminal accumulation theory, and kind of how all roads seemingly, for us at least, all roads seemingly lead to total Bitcoin as being like the ultimate KPI here. So I know there was a lot of context. There's a lot of interesting ways that we can run with this, and we don't have to get the whole thesis out here in one shot. I don't think we could unless we do a 30-hour marathon. But what are your thoughts on that whole piece? And then we can take it in any direction from there.
Yeah, it is a beast, isn't it? It's such a big topic, and I think you're right to try and set the scene with, you know, the history and the context of how some of these terms came about. Yeah, and firstly, let's think about what KPI even means. So KPI stands for key performance indicator. A key performance indicator isn't necessarily a valuation metric, right? And that doesn't even seem to be broadly understood. It's just something a company can use to assess its own performance. Of course, you expect there to be some kind of long-term positive relationship between the thing that you're choosing to measure your performance with and your value as a company long term, but there doesn't have to be an ultra direct link, and it also doesn't need to necessarily be an input into a valuation model. So to give you an example, you could have a KPI as a company as for example, customer satisfaction is a big one in the banks. You wouldn't necessarily build a valuation model based on customer satisfaction to say what the share price should be today. Next thing, let's think about, you know, what's valuation. So working out how much a company is worth. So there is no correct answer to that question, right? There is no correct answer to the question because it depends on assumptions and numbers which are somewhat arbitrary. And there is no consistent way companies are valued by investors. And this was a big theme that Jeff did a really good job of outlining in, I think it was Quant Bros episode 1 or an early one, that when you look at all the big companies, they're not valued in a consistent way.
Agreed.
And that's really important, because it, to set the tone of the conversation, because then we can stop even looking at it like we're ever going to get to a right answer. You're not. And one of the ways that we can you can have an edge as an investor, or what I would say part of the game of investing is being sure of your own valuation framework, even when it is different to the other investors. So the idea is, because if everyone was to agree on the correct valuation, then the price would just converge on that point. It's like efficient market hypothesis, right? So it's inherent that we're all going to value companies differently. But having said that, we can still discuss what is a logical approach to valuing companies, as long as we understand we can't have a final correct number. So then let's go back to yield. So from my memory, the reason yield was introduced was to demonstrate to investors that even if we issue equity, it's still in the interest of the shareholders for us to do so, because we're able to issue equity, buy Bitcoin, and because we trade at a multiple, when we do that, the shareholders end up with more Bitcoin per share than they did before the raise. And as we talked about earlier in the call, the big conversation last year wasn't what's the correct MNAV. The conversation was, why is there a premium at all? Like, why doesn't strategy just trade at an MNAV of 1? Like, how on earth is this possible? Which it's not a serious conversation even. It was generally, it was mainly, I think, as a result of ignorance, and to quote Fong Li on valuation. And I think, Saylor in part, introduced the concept of yield so that investors could understand why we should trade at a premium. Well, if we're increasing Bitcoin per share over time, why wouldn't you value that, or our ability to do that? It didn't necessarily say the MNAV should be X if yield is Y. Like there was never that sort of conversation or link. It was more that in general we can trade at a premium because we can do these accretive transactions, or we can create yield in a number of different ways. So then we go, well, why shouldn't we use that as the basis of valuation? What's the issue with using yield? Well, the issue with using yield is that it's distorted by base effect. So the yield number is useful internally for us to see as investors, how accretive or non-accretive a raise is in relative terms, or to have some kind of, relative to us increase. But the yield number is more a measure of the size of the base rather than the performance. Right. So, which, it's incredibly simple, which I think is often why that, people want to ignore that. Because it sounds like, surely that's so simple. But fundamentally, that's why you can't use it to compare the values of companies, because it's distorted by base effect. So that doesn't mean something's not useful to use altogether, but it means it's not useful as a basis for comparison. So just to explain what I mean by that for anyone that doesn't know, if you increase off a small number, it's much easier to show an impressive yield. So let's say you have 1 Bitcoin on your balance sheet. You only need to get 1 more Bitcoin to show 100% yield, assuming you bought it with debt. But if you've got 100 Bitcoin on your balance sheet, to get 100% yield, you need 100 new Bitcoin, assuming again, you purchase them with debt. Much harder to get 100 Bitcoin than it is to get 1 Bitcoin. So what it means is smaller companies with a small amount of Bitcoin will find it easier to post impressive gains. And you can really take that to the extreme by imagining a company with a fraction of a Satoshi on its balance sheet. If you had a if you founded a company with a fraction of a Satoshi on the balance sheet, you could have 1,000% yield for several years. But of course, it would be completely meaningless, because why would a company with a fraction of a Satoshi have any value? And so when we use that extreme example, we can start to see why scale matters, and also how you can engineer yield to make it look more or less impressive. I think where some people got confused in that, I guess in the Metaplanet run-up, was when a mathematical formula, or I think it's called an identity, gets introduced, which is true for any combination of the value, it seems impressive. So I think it was, what was it? Yield, or so if you look at the Bitcoin per share and you times it by NAV and you times it by the shares outstanding, or what was it? I can't remember. Anyway, it was true for every value.
It was S equals BPM, so share price equals Bitcoin per share times MNAV times something else. But it was just returning to you price, right? Like you can't have a formula that has the share price and MNAV as part of the like substance of the formula, because in part they're both the same thing.
Well, so at least not for at least not for valuation, right? You can have it. It's like it's like share price times shares outstanding equals market cap, but that says absolutely nothing about how to value a company, and yet it's 100% true, and it's because the share price in that formula, or MNAV in the other formula, the MNAV is the valuation. So the real question to ask is, what is the fundamental driver of MNAV expansion? Like, what drives MNAV expansion? Is it a higher or a lower yield? Where it can't be a higher or lower yield because it's somewhat arbitrary based on the size. And the second issue with yield is, which, it's a nice segue, I guess, is that yield ignores some of the Bitcoin we purchase. So really, just to slowly walk through that, yield shows the increase in sats per share. But if we issue equity to buy Bitcoin, only some of the Bitcoin we purchase increases sats per share. Why? Because some of the Bitcoin we purchase is used to back the new shares that we issue. So to give you an example, let's say our company trades at an MNAV of 2, and we raise money and we buy 100 Bitcoin. Only 50 of the Bitcoin we buy appear as yield, right? Why? Because the remaining 50 Bitcoin that we bought had to back the new issuance, which was how we raised the money. So what that means is, when you issue equity to buy Bitcoin, not all of the Bitcoin flow through to yield or its derivatives like Bitcoin dollar gain. And as a result, any valuation methodology built off yield or Bitcoin dollar gain ignores these Bitcoin. Now, straight away, you can see that's silly, because if you took it to a really extreme example, so let's say we raised $1 trillion at an MNAV of 1, and we bought $1 trillion worth of Bitcoin, the yield on that transaction would be 0.
Right.
And yet we would now own $1 trillion of Bitcoin. And now, of course, if you had a company with $1 trillion of Bitcoin, that company is going to trade at a multiple, right? So how can we say the $1 trillion of Bitcoin doesn't have any value, or shouldn't cause it to trade higher? So that's a big issue with yield and its derivatives like Bitcoin dollar gain in the following period, because the base changes, the Bitcoin dollar gain does reflect the shadow Bitcoin in the following period. So in that example I gave, those extra 50 Bitcoin that wouldn't appear as yield, in the next period, the base increases,
Right.
and then you're multiplying against that base. So you do see the benefit of the scale in the later period in Bitcoin dollar gain, but it's still lagging. So in the current period, like your Bitcoin dollar gain doesn't show what the value was of all those additional Bitcoin you bought.
Right.
And this is why it's so shocking to people when they see like how much further ahead strategy's got over the last 7 months, because there's been a lot of focus on yield, looking at these smaller companies. But then when you look in absolute terms, it's like no one's even catching up. And not only is no one catching up, strategy is getting much further away.
Right.
And a big reason for that is because the market hasn't been valuing all of these Bitcoin that we've purchased in a quote unquote non-accretive manner. So yeah, this is where I come back to what should be the basis of any valuation approach. Well, this is why I don't necessarily agree with the advice from strategy itself that it should be Bitcoin dollar gain times a multiple, for the reason I've just mentioned, that it ignores some of the Bitcoin we purchased in the current period. So that's why I think total Bitcoin owned is the only reasonable basis for valuation. So, or in other words, the more Bitcoin is owned, the higher the multiple the company should trade at. And then someone might go, well, what's the correct multiple? Well, the way I look at that is multiples are always arbitrary, and they're kind of based on sentiment. So I don't look at things as what's the correct multiple. It's more which of the competitors should have the relatively higher multiple, right? Which is a different way of looking at the question. So I don't think there's a correct multiple. I think that the entity with the most Bitcoin should have the highest multiple. Right. And where that is will depend on where we are in the market cycle and sentiment. But fundamentally, that should be the driver of multiple. Why? And we can go in deeper, and we go, well, what's the business model of a treasury company? It's issuing Bitcoin-backed securities against its Bitcoin holdings. The value of those securities is based on our credit worthiness. The more Bitcoin you have, the higher your credit worthiness. At a very basic level, sometimes people find that almost too simple, but it really is that simple. Is that there is a relationship between collateral and credit, and it's also it's not linear. So as you get bigger, you get a disproportionate access to credit. Yeah. You can see that at the individual level, you can see that at the corporate level, and at the nation state level. So if you're an individual and you've got no job and no assets, good luck getting a credit card. If you've got a job, you might be able to get a credit card, but if you've got no deposit, you're not going to get a home loan. Once you've got a job and a deposit, well, now you can get a credit card and a home loan. Right. So that increase in your access to credit isn't one for one. There's a step change as your size as a financial entity increases. And then at the higher level, once you're, say, 10 million in assets, well, now you get private banking. So you get access to more credit and at more favorable terms. We see the same thing with obviously with corporations. So, why can strategy buy all this Bitcoin so easily in such low rates? Well, because it's got better credit, and that's going to continue. I think what's really so fascinating is how, or at least what's driven some of my research, is observing that there seems to be a relationship between the increase in Bitcoin price and our accumulation rate. So this is one of the key things I keep coming back to, and it's one of the reasons why total Bitcoin is so important, is that the more Bitcoin you have, and this is kind of so obvious, right? The more Bitcoin you have, the more exposed you are to the increase in Bitcoin price, very simply. So the entity with the most Bitcoin gets the most benefit when the price goes up, very simply. And what that meant was, despite the price increasing to around $100,000, Strategy buys more Bitcoin per day than when the price was around $50,000. Now, you can say that, but you've really got to think about it hard to unwrap the implications of that. Because classically, people looked at Bitcoin, that Bitcoin's rising price will slow the number of or slow the accumulation rate of entities because their cash flows will collapse in Bitcoin terms. And for most entities, that is what we see. So as Bitcoin price rises, the amount of Bitcoin that they can buy with their cash flows diminishes. I mean, I know that's the case for me, right? With my cash flows. So I can't buy as many Bitcoin at 120,000 as I could at 60,000. But for Strategy, we haven't seen that. We've actually seen the opposite. We've seen, as the price has increased, the accumulation rate's gone up. It used to be roughly 160 Bitcoin per day for the first sort of, 3-4 years of operations. And then in the last sort of 12 months, it's roughly 1,000 Bitcoin per day, despite the higher price. And I think what that is the validation of your model, Ryan, of the reflexive flywheel. So this was postulated, and it was one of the genius elements of Quant Bros, and why it got this cult following that it has, was because you noticed early on this reflexive flywheel. And I think those numbers, the fact that the accumulation rate has increased in spite of the increasing price, the implications of that, they're too shocking, which is why it doesn't really get talked about. Because the key thing there is that going to continue? So let's say the Bitcoin price goes up to 200,000. Well, is our accumulation rate going to go up again? Are we going to go from buying 1,000 Bitcoin per day to 2,000 Bitcoin per day? And then what if it goes up to $400,000 price, and then our accumulation rate goes up to 4,000 Bitcoin per day? What does that mean? Well, it fundamentally changes the landscape of Bitcoin, or at least how it was imagined previously.
Right.
And often, if I present these things, sometimes people go, well, how can you say that? Well, what I say now to critics of terminal accumulation theory is that the onus is on critics to articulate their rationale as to why our accumulation rate will slow down with rising price. What we've seen from the data is that the rising price increases our accumulation rate. So why would we expect that trend to stop? Like, I know a big argument has been, for example, we're not going to be able to carry on issuing equity at the same rate, and that's a big reason. I don't think that looks true. I think we've broken all expectations. Even the critics would agree. No one expected us to raise $21 billion in a few months.
Sure.
So it seems odd to think that we won't be able to continue raising money when no one was expecting us to be able to raise so much money in such a short time. Normally, if you don't expect something to happen and then you exceed all the expectations and you raise so much more, that's an indication you'll be able to do more of that, not an indication you'll be able to do less of it. You see what I mean? It's like if you ship $21 billion of a product, you don't assume next year your sales will be zero.
Right.
Like what? Like if you ship $21 billion of product, you probably think you're going to get more sales next year, right? And if you look at, I think there's a narrative that traders in particular really try hard to perpetuate, that somehow the equity issuance has been a failure. It's been an enormous and astronomical success. And if Saylor and the team were worried at all about the market reaction, they wouldn't have reloaded the ATM gun with another 21 billion facility right after. They would have gone, right, we can't spook the market, no one likes it. but obviously that wasn't the case. It's been massively successful. And now we've kind of seen the narrative change. We've seen sort of the market accept the strategy should trade at a premium. No one questions that strategy should trade at a premium. And in fact, now the market goes, why doesn't Saylor just let the premium expand? So
Right.
now the narrative is like, well, Saylor seems to fundamentally control the premium, and all he has to do is ease off the pedal, and now we're going to go to Valhalla, right?
Right.
So so yeah, I don't think there's any reason to suggest that we won't be able to continue issuing equity. And I actually think because we can expect our volume to continue to grow, we can expect our market cap to continue to grow. We know our passive inflows are going to continue to grow. So if we look at just say the passive inflows, I don't know what our passive inflows are at the moment per week, but someone mentioned to me a $50 million figure. I don't know if that's true. I'd be interested to know, because I know people do look into the exact numbers on the passive flows. But let's say it's 50 million of passive inflows a week. Well, that would mean surely we can issue 50 million of equity each week without impacting the price at the margin, because we know we've got roughly 50 million of passive demand. And if we know over time our passive demand is going to grow, because passive demand is a function of market cap, and we, as Bitcoiners, we all probably agree that, well, your future market cap is basically going to be a function of how much Bitcoin you have, or that's going to be the primary driver of market cap for all companies. Most Bitcoiners would agree. And therefore, whoever's got the most Bitcoin is going to dominate the market, the passive flows. And we can issue equity into those passive flows indiscriminately up to whatever the limit of our passive flows are without influencing price at the margin. So for those reasons, it's hard for me to see why our accumulation rate would slow if price increases. And I actually think it's going to continue to accelerate as price increases. But I would love to hear, theories from people as to why they don't think it will, or why they think it would slow. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's a combination of a ton of things, right? Like, and it's a very dynamic, changing narrative. But in the beginning, there was this idea that like it shouldn't trade at a premium at all. Now we're thinking that, collectively, generally speaking, that strategy has just this lever to control MNAV and hence control the stock price. So it is, very much interesting how that's changed. And a couple kind of comments to what you've been saying, Bit Strategy. In regards to the reflexivity component of the reflexive flywheel, I think one of the things that needs to be restated again is that, to the extent that folks want to read this book, The Alchemy of Finance, one of my favorite books ever. You'll see that Soros, when he talks about reflexivity, one of the necessary components, okay, not optional, it has to be there. Necessary components is that to reflexivity is that there has to be a wide range of expected outcomes, right? And he'll talk about this through the lens of the use case example. I believe it was in the 80s. I might be wrong on the time frame, but I'm right on the trade. It was REITs. It was REITs in the 80s. Like I said, believe it was 80s. I know it was REITs. That was kind of like the introduction of REITs, which is a real estate investment trust. It's essentially like an ETF, a securitized like real estate exposure. And at the time, it was like this new thing, right? And a lot of people had, just a wide ranging viewpoints on this. And Soros like loaded the boat, as early as he could, rode the bubble up, and then I believe like sold and flipped short. I'm not sure if he flipped short and actually like rode it back down. And of course, that's one of the applications of the theory in which I think for strategy's purposes, it's kind of a different story, right? A lot of the reflexivity type accounts that like Soros and like Druckenmiller and people who share that same school of thought they would be expecting something on the order of like a .com bubble, or where there's, you ride it up, sell, flip short, ride it back down. And there are some modern examples of that. I think the ARK ETF was just a tremendous example of that phenomena, to like, ride that bubble up and then actually sell, flip short, and then ride it back the other way down. But I think for, strategy specifically, it's more of this, nonlinear moves up where they plateau and then like rebase to potentially like go higher. So what I'm suggesting is like, of course, I think this is more of like an up and to the right upward drift with kind of the boom bust of reflexivity as we go. And again, this requires, not optional, requires just a wide range of expector outcomes. So that's a quick point on reflexivity. Another thing about the equity ATM, and by the way, don't all roads just lead to the equity ATM conversation, in the sense of the one thing that like nobody would acknowledge from the ATM bear camp. Shout out Dan Hillary, thanks for coming back to the team. Is that like we expanded the market cap just by virtue of like creating more shares, again, to the thought experiment of assuming price can, stay flat or drift up, or even perhaps drift down very slightly. As long as one of those things happens, with the preference being to stay flat or slightly grind up, the market cap goes bigger just by virtue of, in increasing the shares outstanding. So there is a future benefit to come from this in the continued positioning in the NASDAQ 100 index, the All Country World Index. I can't think of whatever, big name indices we're in right now. Of course, we're hopeful to be included into the S&P 500, which would be the biggest example of them all. But there is that real like benefit as far as it pertains to the positioning in the passive flows, like having a larger and larger market cap. This comes back to the reflexivity piece, and also strategy's ability to influence that on an ongoing basis. And then to kind of put a bow on everything that Bit Strategy was talking about, and I think we're very much going to come back to this shadow Bitcoin terminal accumulation theory either today or in a follow-on episode. But I think where this comes back to like, okay, this is why this matters, is the prefs. The prefs. I sound like Steve Ballmer when he's up on stage and he's like all like sweat all over the place. He's like, developers. Like our thing would be like the preferreds, because all of this, grandiosity about credit rating and like why we think like strategy should have the highest MNAV premium of them all really comes to its like functional technical base, in terms of strategy having the ability and the capacity to be the dominant player in the preferreds. And this is where we conveniently can shift away from the constant ongoing equity ATM conversation. And this is where I keep coming back to this notion that like strategy is the best business in the world, in terms of how much money they're able to raise and in such a frictionless mechanism. But we have the two largest global total addressable markets being global fixed income and global real estate, especially as it pertains to the rental dynamic, because a real estate rental with the expectation of cash flows is really just a fixed income instrument with physical domain risk added in there. But the point being that like Strike, Strife, Stride, Stretch, all these preferred offerings really do provide like a better vehicle for half the world's money. Half the world's money is seeking two things: stability and a little bit of yield. Stability and a little bit of yield. They're not looking for like that $500 trillion number, that half number that I throw around. They're not looking for the sun, the moon, and the stars in like a Bitcoin type asymmetry, right? And there's nothing any of us can say or do to change that. Again, that 500 trillion is looking for stability, which means like basically no volatility at all, ideally none whatsoever, which is why the global fixed income instrument market has so much demand, especially for like 1 month T-bills, let's say. because then you get your 4% annualized yield. You keep rolling that month after month after month, and then you get to maintain the optionality where, like, let's say in 2 weeks, you need cash. Well, in 2 weeks, you've got, debt instruments maturing, and you can just take all of the principal back at that point, and then you have all your money to grow and expand the business. But yeah, so I mean, everything that I've been saying, and I think this is going to continue, is going to keep coming back to the preferreds, because to be able to go after this market with a product that's like better than basically everything out there by roughly a factor of 2, you get, like, with where the Fed funds rate and SOFR is right now, you get about 4% in the common instruments, right? The 1-month T-bills, the checking deposits, the money market accounts, I bonds might give you 100 basis points higher than that, but it's right around this like 4% ballpark. And all of Strategy's instruments are in this, $8 to $10 or 8 to 10% ballpark, depending on where they're trading relative to par. So that's like the big exciting thing here. And that's why I think Strategy is an actual business, folks, not just a holding company that we're going to debate. Should it be 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, 2x MNAV or whatever? It's like, this is a real functioning business, the dominant player in a new industry that's forming, the most efficient like vehicle for raising capital, and like further on reasons for people to give this entity like more and more capital. And then with the rest of the Bitcoin treasury companies just simply trying to like emulate the same thing, it shows like a lack of differentiation there. Plus, then you factor in the Sailor phenomenon with being the most recognizable Bitcoin bull. You factor in the stack size. You factor in, the first to market and last to market thing with the first to market, last to market concept with the prefs. How that, the implications of that for first to market, last to market in terms of being a Bitcoin buyer, right? BitStrategy, you and I have talked about this. Like, when Sailor says like you won't be able to buy it, he's implying that like Strategy's still going to be a buyer at like much, much, much higher prices than where we are now. And it'll be so high that it almost like won't even make sense for other folks to like start accumulating at that price point. Whereas Strategy can still have its foot on the gas, especially if Stretch is a mega winner. I mean, none of that is even like remotely factored into the expectations of folks. Like, if Stretch is just this like perpetual winner, and Strategy can gauge on like a minute by minute basis the supply demand, and constantly either add or stop adding new supply to this thing. And again, that's just high margin dollars coming into Strategy to then be redeployed into Bitcoin at hopefully higher and higher MNAVs, and hopefully like, not having to rely on the equity ATM. Although I agree with you, I don't mind so much the equity ATM, but the real bull case, the biggest story in corporate finance is like Stretch, the preferreds, and the potential implications of these instruments.
Well, let me play devil's advocate, right?
Please.
So I want to represent the complete other side of the spectrum, because I think there's been sort of the domination of the discourse by traders to such an extent that some people feel like the ATM isn't a good thing, or I look at the ATM as the best, like the common ATM as the best thing. Like it's our best product, and I look at that not just on how I expect it to go forward into the future, but also on past results. Like if you look at it like any other business, and you look at how much we've managed to sell of a product, the product that we sold the most is the MSTR common stock, right? We've bought more Bitcoin as a result of us selling the MSTR common stock than anything else by far. So currently, right? And I think it comes back to, do we agree with what Saylor says when we say it's accretive to issue equity at +1 MNAV? If we do agree that it's a fundamentally good thing to do that, then there is no reason to think we would ever stop if we agree it's fundamentally good. Now, I'll I'll address the other side of the argument, which I hear, which is that issuing equity has a negative impact on share price. That is, I think, broadly speaking, the counter argument as to why we shouldn't issue equity to buy Bitcoin. Okay.
Or
It's
sentiment, at least. If not directly price it, they'll say it affects sentiment.
affects sentiment, right? Now, the first thing I'll push back on that is sentiment for who, right?
Yeah.
Sure, your sentiment, maybe, Mr. Traders, is affected. Did you ask me about my sentiment? No, my sentiment actually gets higher the more we use the ATM. So if Saylor eased off the ATM, I'd be worried.
Sure.
Right. So if Saylor hadn't aggressively issued as he had, I'd think, is Saylor second guessing his own strategy? Does Saylor not believe it's a good thing to issue equity above 1 MNAV to buy Bitcoin? Does he not believe it's accretive? So my sentiment is positively impacted. Now, I acknowledge that some traders might not want to buy the stock because of him issuing the ATM. Like, that's fine. I'm sure there's some people, but we can't ignore the other side of the market that obviously does want to buy, and does want to buy even though he's using the ATM, and actually wants to buy because he's using the ATM, which is often missed. It's not even in spite of. No, I actively want to buy more because this is how he's operating, right? Because he's raised that 21 billion. That's made me want to double down again. Which is the complete opposite of what traders say. And here's the thing as well, like, if traders are saying they don't like the management decision, so they're not buying the stock, they're not influencing the price at the margin, or they're not valuing it. I am buying the stock at the margin. I've been buying the stock this whole time, this whole year, right? So I'm actively participating in the valuation of the stock, right? Anyway, so having said that, I'm not oblivious to the fact that, sentiment is real, or like there has been an element of the discourse which is negative. Of course, I'd be insane to pretend that's not the case. But how should we approach the question? So we should approach the question not that the ATM has ever been bad. I think we should acknowledge that the ATM has been massively, massively successful. That's the first. But we can add the nuance that, is it in our interest to hold off on the ATM, not just because of sentiment, but because it would mean that we might be able to buy more Bitcoin long term, right? And that's fundamentally where it should always come back to. It's always got to come back to buying Bitcoin, not short-term trader sentiment. Oh, someone's upset that the price has done this in the short term. That doesn't matter. What matters is how much Bitcoin we buy, right? Now, that's a spectrum. Like, one of the things Saylor's always been very clear on since he started is that time is of the essence.
Yeah.
We can't wait for the market to be the right price, because we could wake up tomorrow and there'd be a supply shock, right? He's been very clear about that since the start. That's one of the reasons to act urgently. You buy as much Bitcoin as you can immediately, regardless of the price, because you might miss your chance to otherwise, right? And you mentioned this is repeated. So we've always got to come back to that. Time is of the essence. So as soon as anyone criticizes the ATM, it's fine to criticize the ATM if you bring it back to the fundamental strategy of the business, right? The fundamental strategy of the business is to buy Bitcoin as soon as possible and as much as possible. If we don't use the ATM, we're effectively leaving Bitcoin on the table, so to speak, because there's more Bitcoin we could buy in the short term, right, that we're not buying. Now, as I mentioned, I think that's okay. There is an argument to say, hey, let's not use the ATM below a certain amount, but only if we're forecasting that the result of that is that we're going to be able to buy more Bitcoin long term, because the fundamental driver of performance is the amount of Bitcoin we have. The short-term share price is the short-term share price. If it's not over a four-year plus period, it's noise. It's not a duration that you can assess investment over. So investment can only be assessed on a 4-year plus duration. So any argument that, there's, this has been a poor result because the price has been, we haven't reached a new all-time high share price. It's all just short-term thinking. It's irrelevant. Criticism is fine and discourse is fine, but in my view, only if we come back to the principles outlined by management, because otherwise we're ignoring those principles. We're ignoring the fact that it's accretive to issue equity above 1. And someone can argue with that. They can say, no, it's not a good idea to do that. But then I would say you have no business even being interested in a Bitcoin treasury company in the first place, because the fundamental premise of a Bitcoin treasury company is Bitcoin is good and you need to get it as soon as you can. That's the fundamental premise. If you take that into account and you go, yeah, I hear what Saylor's doing. I hear he's trying to buy Bitcoin as soon as possible. That's why he's issuing equity accretively above 1. That's why he does it. That's why he's aggressively bought as much as possible as quickly as he can, because he needs to. However, if we only issue equity above 2.5, my model suggests we're going to be able to buy even more Bitcoin, because we'll get a spike in volume. It will be more accretive to issue at the higher premium. So we're getting a better bang for our buck. The traders are going to love it, etc., right? But any sort of painting Saylor is sort of, he's diluting, or hopefully one day we won't have to use the ATM. Hopefully he'll be able to ease off on that. No, I completely reject all of that. We're going to be using the ATM indefinitely. And not only that, we're going to scale it. We're going to issue more and more equity every year, and it's going to defy all expectations. It's going to be incredible, right? And we're going to do it because we're going to dominate the passive flows, right? And as I mentioned, the reason you can issue equity into the passive flows is the passive flows do not care about Saylor issuing the equity. They don't care whether he does it at a 1.1 MNAV or a 5 MNAV. The passive flows are going to buy the equity come what may. Josh Mandel isn't the #1 holder of MSCR stock. It's Vanguard. Why would we care more about Mandel's opinion than the biggest shareholder, who is completely MNAV agnostic? And in fact, by issuing more equity, that will make them buy more shares, right? So our biggest shareholder, they don't say it because it's just an algorithm, right? Or it's just a program. They're buying it programmatically or according to their mandates. But effectively, what they're saying is, if you keep issuing equity, we'll keep buying it. And the more you issue, the more we'll buy long term. Effectively, that's what they're saying, because as you mentioned, we actively grow our market cap by issuing equity. When you do buybacks, you reduce shares outstanding. And so if share price is neutral, if share price is flat, you reduce your market cap and therefore reduce your weighting in indices. Whereas when we issue equity, assuming share price stays flat, you're actively growing your market cap, which is why we've reached a new market cap all-time high recently, even though we haven't reached a new share price all-time high. So what that means is we're getting more passive flows than ever, which means we have more capacity to issue the ATM into that MNAV agnostic demand than ever before. And why has our market cap grown? Because of the ATM, right? So I think there's such an enormous opportunity, because there is this misunderstanding or this portrayal of the ATM as somewhat not that great. It's like, it's only somewhat not that great if you're not trying to buy all the Bitcoin. If your actual goal was to buy all the Bitcoin, and you agree that that's the basis for treasury company long-term performance, then of course the ATM was a good thing. It allowed us to have over 600,000 Bitcoin. So it's like, absolutely, we should have a nuanced conversation about what's the optimal time to issue equity, but it always has to start from that core premise that issuing equity at a premium to MNAV is a good thing, fundamentally.
Right.
Cheers.
I don't even know where to I thought you said you were going to offer up the I thought you said you were going to play devil's advocate, but it was just like more of the pro ATM rhetoric. But we're so ingrained on that
I meant devil's advocate against the idea that the ATM is kind of not that great. Like, because I feel like that's become almost like a dominant, and I think a lot of people actually believe that. And I'm like, have you ever heard Sailor say that? It's like, and why would Sailor be doing it if it wasn't a good idea? So this is why, sometimes I'm not sure, is like, do people have other agendas, or is something else going on here? Because it's like, and because people often go, oh, are you saying we shouldn't have some kind of discourse about what Sailor's doing? It's like, no, of course we should have a discourse about what Sailor's doing, but let's start by listening to what Sailor's doing, right? As a first step to that discourse. Let's not pretend that he's willy-nilly ruining the share price. That's obviously stupid. Like, and so
Right.
I'm playing devil's advocate against that stance, that the ATM might not be good, or maybe we can hopefully ease off on it. No, it's a fundamental driver. It's a fundamental driver of our growth and Bitcoin acquisition. Two, it's our most successful product by far, by far. Like, Sailor's mentioned that, Strike maybe strikes the iPhone moment. I'd argue MSTR is the iPhone moment. We sold $21 billion of it, and bought Bitcoin. It far more than anyone imagined. No one was imagining we'd be able to do that. It's not, the stock hasn't collapsed. We're on a new market cap all-time high. So this idea that something has happened that went wrong is just, it's false. I'm just going to say that it's fundamentally false.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would also agree with that and saying that it's fundamentally false. And here's perhaps one of the things that just provides all these like different perspectives is that we all do admittedly have different time horizons with this, right? Like even all the people on like the same team, so to speak, like all the shareholder base, um, some people want to optimize for short-term outcomes, and that like obviously seems to be like the majority. I mean, how many comments do you see about not even just like MSTR, but maybe like the mining stocks? Like, what price is like CLSK gonna, like Clean Spark, gonna be at the end of the year? And it's like that's just not the way to think about any of this stuff, right? Because there's a million and one different things that can move an asset price in the short term. There's so many unknown unknowns, and like just trying to move from one 3 or 6 month or even 12-month positioning of like, what do we think the year end price is going to be, and then having to or reassess that at year end, like, do we stay here, or we're probably going to want to roll into something else because it's just such a short term perspective. But it's like, here's the example to like tie all this in. It's like Amazon. I forget which like audiobook or which documentary I was watching, but it was someone who had followed the Amazon story from early days and was like an early reporter to like the public figure that was like presenting himself, named Jeff Bezos. And I forget this reporter's name, but what he says in this audiobook or documentary was that like of all the grand pitches that like Jeff made to these like savvy investors privately, like in the private rounds before Amazon went public, of that like initial core base up until the 2021 high where Jeff did start peeling some of his Amazon off the table, the only people, or I should say, like, guess who actually like took that journey with Jeff Bezos from the beginning till 2021 and never sold a share the whole time?
No way.
The only person who took the journey with him was Jeff's parents. And those, of all these like savvy, very sophisticated people who just took like because you go back, and this is where like the business history stuff gets so interesting. Is like you go back and you look at like Bezos's like year one, which I believe was 97 on the public markets, and you look at his like shareholder letters. If you just control F for the phrase like long term, you'll see it highlighted all over the place. Like his whole like core message in the beginning was this is a long term value creation. People should be focused on like the decades to come. Like most of the money that we're going to make, nearly all of the money that we're going to make if this is successful, is coming years and years, really decades and decades into the future, but no one took the journey with them. Just him and mom and dad who were the people who actually like believed in him the most, as you can imagine. But it's just so fascinating that like everyone's like, you know, perspective is seemingly so short term. And this goes back to one of the things that you had said about Saylor, where he says, you know, trading Bitcoin, the underlying, is a sign of lesser intellect. And I think that's so true. And I think it also applies to MSTR underlying stock, especially when you consider that there are like all these tremendous instruments for trading specifically, whether it be a double levered ETF, an option market, that perpetual futures, whatever. Like there's way better like instruments that are designed for trading. And it's like so much of the conversation, at least what we did in like Quant Bros and True North and like some of the familiar faces in this space, like I would say us too included in that, is that like what we're talking about here is not just this short-term play. Like, who cares? There's plenty of other things that could be done with that. The interest level, the magnitude of this, the seriousness of the moment, to be throwing around phrases like the most significant, you know, corporate activity going on in the world right now is to express the view that this is a very, very long-term thing and not something that we should even care about what tomorrow or next year is to bring, right? It's like, what can be like, the thing I want to speculate on is like, what can be like the total value creation of something like Stretch, of something like the preferreds that don't even exist yet, but are coming in the future. Like, what could that be like? How quickly can we double the Bitcoin stack from here, given a successful ramp in all the preferreds, right? In my episode number 1, I think conservatively, within 24 to 36 months, we can double the Bitcoin stack from here. And I don't think anyone's, you know, really talking about that or thinking through the implications as to what that looks like for what would be like the rest of the 7 years of the Bitcoin gold rush. And then potentially doubling from there in terms of Bitcoin, you know, total hodl, or the total stack size as far as that is concerned. But yeah, I mean, this point right here is really in dealing with, you know, thinking that we have like a long-term value creation monopoly with an irreversible lead, right? The Apples, the Mag 7s, the Netflix, the Googles of the world, they can't just flip a switch and start doing this. I mean, even Berkshire, who actually has the size to do something like this, same thing. Buffett's never gonna do it, let's be honest, but they're gonna have to put it up to a shareholder vote. We have we have data from this kind of stuff happening, right? From the huge like mega established companies. Microsoft, 99.5% of the people who decided to vote voted no. So there's no flip that these mega techs can switch. So the lead's irreversible there. You know, I of course don't think any of the smaller ones are going to become a competitive threat to like overtaking strategy and size. I also think like the narrative around like the coolness of like iBid and stuff like that is just going to keep fading to zero, right? Because like nobody cares about it. It's just a Bitcoin price exposure in an ETF form. But we were still at a point where people were saying that that's somehow, you know, more of a compelling instrument than an operating company who has all this known and unknown optionality and levers that can be pulled. So we're going to keep living through this whole like short-term, long-term dichotomy, right? And the flourishing of the other companies, and how that comes back to like the inevitable like comparison story. But yeah, that short, long-term stuff is going to be with us for some time. You know. Bit Strategy, you still there? It says audio problems, going to rejoin. I was also going to say I could really use like a NASCAR. I could use a NASCAR pit style bathroom, because I'm happy to keep going. Are you there? Are you with us?
Yeah. I was just having some technical difficulties, mate. Sorry about that, but I heard pretty much everything you said. And yeah, I think it's important as well we acknowledge that Saylor sort of saw all of this coming, and that's really what takes him to this, in my view, whole other level. And it links back into firstly what you were talking about with the reflexivity boom bust cycle, and as Soros articulates it, and ATIQ mindset, I think, did a good post on this the other day, sort of highlighting, hey, reflexivity works in both directions, and that's it's really true. And that's why I think what Saylor's done is so clever, because he's normally the market and the business are two separate things, as we know, right? So when Jeff Bezos is growing Amazon, he's looking at growing his business, and there's going to be this knock-on effect in the market. Whereas because of the nature of our Bitcoin treasury operations, the marketplace and our business are one and the same. They're unified in a way that's never been done before. And Saylor knew from the outset that what he's creating is the ultimate traders marketplace. And it's always going to be, of course, necessary to listen to what the traders are saying, because one of the core value propositions is that we're this ultimate traders marketplace. And there has been good and valid criticism that one of the tenets of Saylor's approach has been to create volatility in the stock. So hey, if volatility is down and the traders aren't interested, does this impact long-term shareholder value creation? So even if you do adopt this sort of a long-term shareholder mindset, there is an argument to say, creating those short-term conditions for traders is necessary for the long-term value creation. And that's why it's obviously so important to listen to what the traders are saying and so on. But I do think a useful analogy for investors is to, as hopefully people know, I like to compare strategy to Rome. And if we think about Rome, well, we can think of the marketplace as a spectacle, like the Colosseum for the gladiatorial games. And we can think of the big superstar traders like Josh Mandel and Dan Hillary and so on. We can think of these guys as gladiators in the games. And these guys are doing really exciting things. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. And we see, a dramatic loss, and that's great entertainment for the crowd. Like, big shout out to Grain of Salt for, being open and, holding his head high when he had that big options loss. And that's part of it as well. And then other times we see these big victories like Mandel predicting the 84K, getting it right. I sort of imagine that like the top gladiator doing an awesome execution, and he predicted it beforehand, and the crowd goes nuts, way. And then he turns to the emperor and he's like, "Emperor, you must only issue equity at 2.5 mNAV." And the emperor's like, "Oh, okay." So it's kind of like that. And in Rome, the gladiator games were really important. You've got to make the games good to keep the mob happy, and the mob is like the sentiment. It's like the trading sentiment. Oh, Saylor shouldn't have done this. Whoa. But really behind the scenes, right? Yeah, the emperor might be at the games and he might show his face at the games and he might be the figurehead. But really the emperor knows that the games are a distraction. Right. It's bread and circus. You have to have the games to keep the mob at bay, and you can't have Rome without the mob. But the real game of Rome was expanding the empire. Right. And what's the strategy empire? Well, the strategy empire is Bitcoin. So yes, the games are important, but let's not ever take our eyes off the real prize, expanding the territory of the empire, right? So our territory is how much Bitcoin we have. You can think of that as the borders. And every time we buy new Bitcoin, we're expanding our territory. And when we expand our territory, that means we can expect more inflows to come to Rome via our financing cash raises in the future. So I think that that framework gives a useful way of looking at the the sentiment. It shows respect to the trading community in the sense that, you know, in the same way that Rome saw the value of having the games and the gladiators are superstars and whatnot, they have their place and they're important. But let's never conflate the games with Rome itself. You know, the games are not Rome. The games are just put on by Rome. And so it's important to remember that with all this discourse. It's important to remember that Saylor wanted to create this environment for traders. If you think about it, if the traders were always bullish, well, then there'd be no volatility, right? So you kind of need to, if you want a volatile stock, you kind of want changes in sentiment back and forth. You want times when the traders aren't happy, because why else would they ever go short? Right? Or if, you know, is there ever a good time to go short if the traders are always happy? Because then surely we're all going long together, right? So and that kind of links back in finally to you know, Soros's thing and what you were saying before as well, which is how there's going to be this sort of step change effect. And it's because, you know, let's say with the collateral credit reflexive cycle, you expect this expansion of credit and eventually it can't continue. But then it's fascinating because Saylor takes these spikes and then he deleverages by getting loads of equity, which is what seems to be the thing that will prolong that reflexive cycle ongoing. And it's also why it's so vital to, when you get these spikes in sentiment, to then capitalize on those spikes in sentiment and turn that into a bigger balance sheet, because then it provides the next base for the next leg up. When you you know, when you add the credit in, as you said, the only way we could launch these products is by having that bigger capital base,
Right.
and that you know, it works to prevent that massive downside move. And you know, a lot of other people have talked about this as well. But of course, like, yeah, Bitcoin could go down in price, but there's a certain point of like demand of increasing daily demand, and where, you know, people like Saylor are probably getting a good feel for the fact that it doesn't look like the market's going to go down, based on what we can observe about the rate of accumulation in the marketplace. And I think it's fascinating to dissect some of his tweets, like that one you mentioned, man, like how he was saying Bitcoin used to be a trading, I'm paraphrasing, of course, it used to be a trading asset, in the future it'll be a treasury asset.
Right.
Like, again, to me, that's another one of these very, very clear pointers to the fact that it's not going to be traded at some point. And yeah, maybe we won't touch on terminal accumulation now, but if it's not a trading asset, that means it's not traded. Right. Like that's what it means. And you know, so Saylor's done a few of these, like he makes comments like, buy Bitcoin before there's none left for you to buy. And then people go, oh, but we will always be able to buy it. And it's like, well, is that what Saylor said? Is that what Saylor told you? Did he tell you that you're always going to be able to buy it, or are you hoping that you're always going to be able to buy it? Right. And I feel like that recent one is, you know, it's very explicit. Again, it's and this is a nice point as well. Like, I was a Bitcoin trader for a long time before Saylor came in, right? And there's always been good trades in Bitcoin, right? You know, like you know, buying spot and shorting the future during the bull market, things like that, right? Doing stuff like that. Oh, look, you know, this is a great little trade. The whole thing Saylor proved to the market was all of that stuff is a waste of time.
Right.
Like, that's what he showed. He showed the only game is to buy the Bitcoin. And then the irony now is that we're repeating the same process, is that because he's created this traders marketplace, everyone's getting lost in all these fascinating little trades you can do. Oh, if I, you know, pair this security with that security, I could make $3. Okay, great. That's really good for you. Well done. I'm glad you found a good trade. But what do you think the lesson that Saylor's taught the entire Bitcoin market is? Stop trying to be clever traders and buy the Bitcoin. Right? That's what he showed. Was it better to be doing, you know, the cash and carry trade, or was it better to be accumulating Bitcoin as a public company and leveraging its balance sheet? Which one should you have been doing? You know, for the 5 years before 2020, right? You should have just been buying Bitcoin, clearly. And I think traders, in my view, like obviously some are going to be incredibly successful, right? Just the same way as you got some altcoin traders. I know altcoin traders that got so stupidly rich it makes you feel sick. It makes you feel unwell, right? That they did that. Does it mean I envy them? No, because they haven't really built anything. They hit some trades big. Well done. Okay, and people will do that, right? People will get stupidly rich trading MSTR. Some people will. A lot of people will lose a lot of money doing that, right? It's the same thing that happened in Bitcoin. Some people do incredibly well trading and then get out, or some people do not so well. A few people do very well. But the bigger opportunity is to build on top of strategy, just like the bigger opportunity wasn't to trade Bitcoin, it was to build on top of Bitcoin. Not a trading business, build a business on top of Bitcoin. And I feel like it's the same opportunity again with strategy. I think it's easy to get distracted by shiny objects like selling covered calls and getting a bit of income. But just the same as Bitcoin, I think the bigger opportunity is to accumulate with 100% conviction over the long term. And I think the people that do that and they combine that with a social media presence, which I would say is the core of what Saylor's done. So, we often think of strategy as buying Bitcoin, but his strategies also had that social media element. Post about the fact that you're buying something, buy it long term, talk about it, and it builds and it accelerates, and eventually people even forget there was any other game in town. And Saylor's kind of done that. But yeah, having said that, I just want to say I respect the hell out of traders. Like, I love trading, and I know you do too, man. And you study the greats, like and trading's really cool. It's really exciting. But I think it's impossible to ignore that irony of what Saylor's said about trading. To ignore the fact that he's kind of intentionally created this trading marketplace while still counter trading all the traders in effect. I think that's important as well. Anyway, cheers, man.
Sir, a lot of great stuff there. And I hope this whole MSTR being Rome and wanting to expand the Empire of Rome is I hope that's like our first topic on the next show whenever you and I end up getting back on. But are you okay with us wrapping it here? This
Of course, bro. Yeah, it's 2 hours, right? Yeah, 2 hours 20.
This young lady has come back in and she's like, "Hey, we normally go running around this time. What's the deal?" We're normally running by now.
Does she need a lot of exercise, mate? How many times do you take her out a day?
Oh, it's once a day at least. She'll do 2-a-days though, no problem. But the exercise and the fitness for her and for any of these like military type like canine dogs, it touches everything. If they're not working out enough, it'll affect their mood. They'll be too strong, like high strung in the house when just trying to like get work done. They'll be meaner on the streets, like just like more aggressive because they have all this like energy that they have to like get out. You know what I mean? Almost similar to men, right. And like you've got a lot of like anger, depression, anxiety, stress, whatever it is. But the more you hit the weights in the weight room and go running, the better folks are able to deal with these things, right? And that's a Rogan thing too, and that like he had said like he thinks the people who have the hardest time holding it together are the people who never work out. And that concept is just magnified with the dogs, right? Because that is their release, is the fitness. So yeah, it's so necessary for their health. They need to be able to get the long strides in. They need to burn off energy so that in the house they'll be like kind of like this. Like if we weren't working her out frequently, she'll never take a nap. Now she'll doze off and take a nap, which is good during the workday, when we're trying to get stuff done. So yeah, these dogs are the best though. I'm getting the Belgian Malinois next month, and it's just such a high energy, intense animal. And it's so reflexively like mutual between me and the dog, because me having the dog, now I can't drink, which is good, by the way, which is good. Now I have to eat right. would also go, now I have to sleep right because that dog's only sleeping 8 hours. And then as soon as you wake up, it's going to be over top of you in the bed with the Frisbee in its mouth. And it's going to be like, let's go, let's do something, or let's go rescue hostages, right? Like these dogs want to be given commands by the owners. Like you can't just open up the back door and be like, you're free. Go explore, you're free. No, they want the human, they want their one owner to be constantly giving them jobs, giving them work, and then like rewarding them on the back end with like love and attention, but also with like food to like reflexively build the good habits. So I know that was a good kind of like closing rant here, but
I think it's funny, bro, that like you're seeing the reflexivity even in your relationship with your dog. Hey, you've got a reflexive view, you've got a reflexive lifestyle these days, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's what it's got to be. You know, you want to keep
100%.
like finding ways of like getting harder, stronger, faster, smarter, and it's just interesting that so many investing concepts will line up so well with like broader life concepts. You know.
Yeah, that's true, man. And like, I think that's been key for me. Hey, try and stay in alignment with being yourself, and find a way of working that it feels frictionless, so you can keep going over the long term. Because you know, if you're doing stuff you don't want to do, it's why I don't do too many calls or whatever. I've got to really want to do it, because otherwise, before you know it, you sort of you wake up and you think, why am I even doing this? And that's when you can lose steam, can't you? So I hear what you're saying, man. Like having a lifestyle that's good, touching grass, like getting out in the sunshine, I think is a big one. Like actually getting sunlight on your skin every day. Salt water, if I can. I can't wait to get down the beach once it starts getting a bit warmer here. It's like winter at the moment in Sydney. But yeah, man, this is all key because, like I said at the start, I'm here for the long term. So we want to keep well. We want to, follow Sailor's rules of, curate your time, curate your friendships and whatnot.
Train your body, train your mind.
Train your body, train your mind. Follow that stuff, and we just, chip away at it day by day, like Sailor has, like Strategy has with the Bitcoin accumulation. Before you know it, it starts to compound. And if we can do that, and just by keeping it simple, putting out our content, buying assets, having a good time, then the future is very bright, I think. So yeah, man, it's been an absolute pleasure doing this with you. I have actually wanted to respond to some of the comments in the group chat, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. I don't know if I'm being a bit slow there, but I've seen some lovely comments that I would like to reply to. Do you know how we can reply in there, bro? Like, do I just put it in the private chat or?
Yeah, so not in the private chat between me and you, but if you look at the right side of the restream, you should see the chat. Click on that, and then you should be able to just type in there.
Type in the bottom. Yeah, I can't actually. No, I can't.
I can see
the screen.
That's interesting, but you can see the messages in there.
I can see the messages. I can see messages from people, so I'll try and. Some have come through from YouTube. Hey, that's clever. So it just streams on YouTube same time, does it? Oh, that's cool.
Twitter and YouTube same time.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, I'll try and figure that out or message people separately. Hi, Colleen. All right, man. Well, yeah, thanks so much for your time, bro. And I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Yes, sir. Likewise, I think this was a great first episode for the two of us. We'll, of course, do more of these. I think the MSTR being Rome is just such a fun, next talking point for us to start on. But for now, I think it's time for me and this young lady to go do a couple miles because she actually barged into the room. Like the door is closed, but it's just a door handle. So she can press up on and then just get into any of the rooms. So she was barging in. See, she's like, it's time. It's time to go. So thanks everyone so much for joining us on the live stream. I'm planning on being back here probably a little bit later, but next Monday of next week, we'll see if Bit Strategy wants to join. If not, that's totally fine. I'll go ahead and do a solo episode. But again, thank you so much, everyone, for the kind words, for caring to listen to us, especially given that there's a trillion and one other things that people could be doing or content that they could be listening to. So it's not missed on us. And with that, see, Sophie's ready. With that, we're going to hit the road. Thanks again, Bit Strategy. Thanks, everyone. Good night.